Hello, I'm Edna Kane Williams, Executive Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at AARP. The time you are investing today to take the course, Becoming a More Inclusive Volunteer, is critical to our overall success. At AARP, we are working to uplift the voices and experiences of all people. As an AARP volunteer, we need your help to embed diversity into our advocacy, education, and outreach work. This training and others like it are examples of our commitment to the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the 50 plus. As we all work to fulfill AARP's mission to empower people to choose how they live as they age, we must remember that AARP's founder, Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus, saw the power of uniting diverse and inclusive voices to advocate for change. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is everyone's responsibility at AARP. Thank you for taking the time to take this training. It will help you grow your skills at becoming a more inclusive volunteer.
Hello, I'm Derek Young, and today I'm going to be talking about what your team, your fellow volunteers, wish you knew about equity. For the past 32 years, I've been working with great organizations like AARP all around the United States on this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, in recent years, we've heard people add the term belonging, which for me is significant. We've also had people add the term justice, and there are many other terms we could add. But what I've found during that time is that out of all those topics, the one, in my opinion, that really gets the least attention, but is actually the most important, is equity. Now, the way I look at equity is when you care enough about another person to give them exactly what they need in order to succeed. Now, that exactly what they need, it could be knowledge, it could be skills, it could be advice, it could be honest feedback, it could be exposure. The list goes on and on. But at the end of the day, the way you help someone maximize being included, maximize their diversity, that unique thing about them that makes them stand out in some way, the way you help them maximize those things is by delivering equity. So for our purposes at AARP, I want you to think of equity as an action, as something you do. Because more often than not, that's going to be the key to how you make equity work for another person. Now, let's think about it like this. I'm going to go back in time. I'm going to go into the Wayback Machine, and I'm going to think about some of the relationships I've had. And I'm going to ask you to do the same. Because what I've found over the years is helping people uncover how they have experienced, received equity, if you will, is very helpful in the process of them identifying other people they can deliver equity to. So let's go way back. Now, I'm originally from St. Louis, and I went to George Washington Carver Elementary School. And my favorite teacher of all time, she was both my 6th and 8th grade teacher, was Mary Lou Pearson, Mrs. Pearson. And one of the things she did, I remember, is that I was part of a split classroom. We had half 5th graders, half 6th graders. And there was myself and 4 other students who did so well on the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. I just checked somebody just having a flashback, the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, that she actually had us as 5th graders doing 6th grade work. Well, we did so well, we wound up skipping the 5th grade. That's equity. See, Mrs. Pearson saw that we had the talent and the capacity to work up, to work ahead. She saw in us, even though we were younger than all of our 6th grade peers, she saw in us an ability to do something some of the other 5th graders possibly couldn't do, and she gave us an opportunity, and that impacted all of us forever. Now let me think about high school. Again, I went to high school in St. Louis. My freshman year of high school, 1977, sadly, I had a number of racist experiences with fellow students. And what I've told people is, if you have 1,000 people in a building, it only takes one person to ruin your experience. Well, I had a number of experiences that were not pleasant. At that time, the leadership of our school, good people, wholesome people, but for whatever reason, they didn't see that as big enough a problem to change it, to fix it. Well, the next year, a gentleman who had been the gym teacher became the principal of our school, Mr. Owens. Overnight, he set a culture in that building where for the next 3 years, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, I never had another racist experience. Why is that? Well, Mr. Owens, in his leadership, he created a culture, he sustained a culture, and he held people accountable in such a way that no one wanted to violate the values of the school and thereby treat me or any other person in a racist, demeaning, discriminatory, or derogatory way. That's equity. When Mr. Owens took it upon himself as the leader in that building to ensure and assure that people were going to be treated with dignity, regardless of what was in the hearts and minds of the people who were treating them badly. Now let's take it up a little bit. All right? Let's think about my time in the corporate world. For 7 years, I worked for Dollar General Corporation, which is headquartered in the Nashville, Tennessee area. The gentleman who was both my mentor and my sponsor, and those are very different terms but significant terms, was a gentleman named Bob Carpenter. Bob started off as our chief administrative officer and then ultimately became the president of Dollar General. During my time at Dollar General, over 7 years, we grew from basically 1,000 stores to about 5,000 stores. During that 7 years, with Bob as both my mentor and my sponsor, I got 4 promotions. My income went up 10x. Well, some of the things Bob did, Bob delivered what I call seatbelt sessions. That's actually one of our sessions you're going to get as an AARP volunteer. Bob sat me down on a periodic basis and gave me hard, honest, constructive feedback that sometimes hurt my feelings, that sometimes seemed to come out of left field. But he always did it with my development and my growth in mind. So I always knew, even though sometimes the feedback was hurtful, I always knew Bob was doing that for my benefit. Hence, 4 promotions and a 10x income growth. You see, equity has a lot of different faces. But ultimately, if you think about the initial definition, you deliver equity to people you care about. And equity means you're going to give them precisely, exactly the information, the support, the feedback, the opportunity, the exposure that'll help them. 2 words you often see in this conversation are equity and equality, right? Very similar words. Equality means giving everyone the same thing. Clearly, we live in a country, we live in a world where that hasn't happened on a regular basis in all aspects of our society. So don't ever confuse the two, because sometimes when people have a good heart, they say, I want to treat everyone the same. I want you to think about something. You grew up probably learning the golden rule. Do unto others as you would what? Want them to do unto you, right? Makes sense. Positive. Purposeful. What I want you to apply when you think of equity is the platinum rule. The platinum rule says, do unto others as they want to be done unto. This is a silly example, but you'll get it. Imagine a person like me who loves soccer. And let's say I have a daughter. Let's say my daughter's name is Sally, and Sally plays on her soccer team, and the team is doing pretty well, but I notice they all have different cleats on their feet, and they really don't even have quality cleats. So me, being a caring person who wants to be equal, I go out and I get everyone new cleats. Isn't that a good thing? Sure it is. And because I want to be fair and equal, I get everybody the same size shoe. Well, you already know that's probably sounds pretty ridiculous to you. In some instances, that's how equality can feel. Because you give everyone the same thing, but it still may not be enough based on their unique situation. So that is why, as a great AARP volunteer, I want you to always be distinguishing between where do I need to deliver equality to my fellow volunteers, but more importantly for this conversation, where do I need to deliver equity? Now, two things I want to bring up here. One is I want to give you an example of how powerful equity is when you really understand it and when it's really done right. Now, the 2 points I want to make are, number one, when you're thinking about equity, what I'm going to say here is very important. Never use your own life experience as the basis for deciding how equity should flow. I'm going to say that again. Never use your own experience. I grew up in this manner. I went to this school. I've had these things afforded to me. Never do that as a starting point, because what I found in 3 decades of doing this work, what I found is when we start with our own standard of living, our own life experience as the basis, it can sometimes be kind of hard to really see or even believe that someone else needs the equity they need. So that's the first point. Along with that, the second point is, I want you to be a person who is constantly expanding your perspective on how other people see the world. Constantly expanding your perspective on how the world has treated other people. Now, are you seeing how when you put those two together, it's going to put you in a much better position to deliver equity? Well, here's a great example. Several years ago, I served on a board of directors for a community college. It's Nashville State Community College. Phenomenal school. Dr. Shauna Jackson is their president, and a good friend of mine brought me onto that board. Well, several years ago, our governor in Tennessee signed a bill and said that if you want to go to a community college, you can go for free. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that phenomenal? People were excited, people were fired up, and some people even sort of cleaned off their hands like, well, we got that done. Now everybody that wants to will go to community college. Just a second. Even though that great opportunity was made available to people all across the state, there were some people who yet still weren't able to take full advantage. Well, oh my gosh, DY, who would that be if it was free? Well, it was the person who still couldn't afford childcare. Though I want to take advantage of this free opportunity because I clearly could not have paid tuition, I still can't break away long enough to go to classes because I can't afford childcare. There were some people who maybe didn't have that issue, but they literally just didn't have enough income, enough cash flow to afford bus fare. They surely couldn't afford an Uber. There were people who wanted to go to school who literally couldn't afford the bus fare. We also had students who could get to school, but you know what they were sacrificing to get to school? Eating. So when some very smart people got in a room and began to ask the students what they need, the school partnered with the Metro bus service to create bus fare. The school partnered with several daycares to offer a very reduced daycare amount. The school created a pantry. That's equity. See, equity says, I'm not going to judge you for being in the position you're in. I'm not really going to have much of an opinion at all. But what I am going to do is I want to fully understand your needs so that I can access all that I have access to help you get what you need. Now, how does this fit for you as an AARP volunteer, whether you're a first-year volunteer or a 10-year volunteer? In your volunteer sphere, there are going to be certain people you work with, interact with on a regular basis. All right? So I want you to get those people in mind. And I want you to really think about this. I'm not talking about that rare, infrequent interaction you have. I'm talking about those volunteers you see, you work with on a regular basis. Now, this is going to be really deep, so pay close attention. When it comes to delivering equity to your fellow volunteers, there are two words that I want you to burn into your memory. Those words are ask and observe. The first thing I want you to build into your process as a volunteer is for those people you work with on a regular basis, periodically sit down and have a conversation and say, hey, what are some things that you need that would help you be a more powerful AARP volunteer? Ask them. You would be amazed that regardless of a person's race, creed, or color, or lifestyle, if you would just ask what they might need to be an even greater volunteer, most people will probably tell you. You see, I think when we hear words like diversity, equity, inclusion, we get a little bit maybe too grandiose. Well, my skill set, my focus is how do you make stuff so practical, so simple, anybody could get it. Anybody could do it. Well, that's the first thing I want you to do, is I want you to start asking those volunteers you work with how they could be best supported. Do they need to meet a local lobbyist who could help them understand some of the things AARP is working on in your city? Do they need better understanding of some of the technology that's available to them, but they just really have never worked with technology much? Do they need to understand some of the personalities in some of the rooms that they're going to be going into before they go into that room in advance? Are you seeing this now? You see, what I want you to do is, if you're taking notes, you're already an expert at equity. I bet you are. I bet you could name me 5 to 25 people that you have delivered equity to. You probably just never thought about it. Because more often than not, we are constantly delivering equity to people we like and people we're comfortable with. So the first step is to think about those diverse people who are part of your volunteer sphere, reach out to them and ask, how might I support what you're doing in AARP? Now, what's the second key word? Well, it's observe. And simply put, all that means is, as you interact with your fellow volunteers, maybe pay a bit closer attention to what they need to be more successful. Maybe you notice that one person is sort of stepping over other people's comments, and it's sort of upsetting folks, but nobody's willing to tell them. Maybe you're that person who has a relationship with them who can say, hey, could I run something by you, something I've noticed? Maybe you observe one person is really jovial in the small group, but when you get to larger forums, they sort of shrink a bit. Maybe there's a conversation you can have. Maybe there's an event you can have them join you at so that they can start to increase their confidence. Are you starting to get what I mean here? Equity is about being practical, but it's about really sitting back and preparing yourself to be a giver. And that's why I started with the word caring. So to wrap up this video, I want you to do 2 simple things. Number 1, I want you to walk backwards like I did. And I want you to go as far back as you can. And I want you to think about any coach, any teacher, any boss, any fellow volunteer who has literally given you what you needed in order to be more awesome. And I want you to literally document that. And I want you to study it. First of all, so you can understand we all need equity of some kind. Equity is not something that's reserved for one specific group. We all need some sort of equity at some point in our life. So step 1 is to go back and really assess your own life and identify how equity has always been a part of your life. Then secondly, I really want you to make a list of those key volunteers who are in your sphere of influence. And I want you to do both those things. ask, and observe. Make a few notes about what you're seeing that might be a way you could help that person by delivering equity to them. But even more valuable than that, set up a Zoom call, set up a cup of coffee, and just let them talk to you about their own perspective on what they might need. I really think that as you do these things, your team will say, wow, this person really does understand equity, and it's really helped me. Take care.